And then we could like talk about how we became like, I don't know, side project connoisseurs.
Yeah, we can do that.
If we ever decide to rename the podcast Side Project Connoisseurs, is it? Welcome to Slow and Steady, the podcast where you get to follow along as we build products in public. Each week, we'll give you an honest peek into our lives as we share our struggles, our wins, and everything in between. I'm Brian. I am in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and I am feeling motivated.
And I'm Benedict. Today is July 20th. I'm, as usual, near Frankfurt, Germany, and I'm feeling productive.
And I am Benedicta, and I am still in Oslo, Norway. This is episode 100. Woo! And I am feeling super pumped.
Wow. Episode 100. I never thought I would say that.
You've been going slow and steady for 100 episodes.
The whole time.
Yeah. I can't.
Yeah, like it's crazy. But I mean, consistency is key here. I think I don't think we missed a lot of weeks, maybe 2 or 3. But other than that, I think we recorded an episode every single week.
Just showing up week after week after week.
I am super impressed.
Well, and we're glad to have you and glad to add you into the mix here. And so what we thought we would do, listener, is because we are at episode 100 to kind of, celebrate and mark the occasion, is to just spend some time in this episode doing a bit of a reintroduction, kind of getting to know all of your co-hosts, and for us to ask a few questions of each other about our backgrounds, how we came to be where we are at right now. So, Queen Ray, Benedicta, you're gonna be up first. We never took the time to give you like a true formal, royal welcome into the show.
I'm happy you're leaning into this, Queen.
I'm feeling it. I am realizing that I have not leaned into it quite enough. So from now on, get ready. But yeah, would you go ahead and just kind of give us like a little bit of a background? How did you get into web development? What have you been working on that got you here? Yeah,
you want to do all of me first, or should we do how we get into development?
Yeah, no. Let's just,
like around.
No, let's just everything about
everything about me. So,
how did you first get into web development, and like what was the first thing that you ever, pushed into production, that sort of thing?
I think actually the first thing that I made was pushed into production. It was a website for my junior high school. I cannot remember what was on there anymore, but my Norwegian teacher, of all things, he came back from some sort of what's it called, like additional education that he did as a teacher.
Professional development kind of thing.
And he came back and he was like, wow, this like web stuff is so cool. He had been taught some HTML and CSS, and somehow he kind of like rounded up, I think about 4 of us girls, and we're like, this is like, you should be doing this. So it's me and I think 2-3 others. And we then had this as an elective. Web development as an elective. I don't really remember what it was called, but we had it as an elective, and we ended up making a page for the school, and we were allowed, of course, access to their, I don't know, some kind of folder somewhere, because it was actually live. It was actually online at some point before, the city decided to make all of the websites for the schools. I mean, this is how it was in the beginning, right? It was like whoever
could do it,
whoever could save HTML files, somewhere, could do it. So that was my introduction. I don't know if that was like the first time I was doing computer stuff, because my mom is a programmer and a CTO, or ended her career as a CTO, a chief technical officer for hire. So she sat me down, and she was a single mom. So she sat me down at some point with the computer, and she was like, you can do whatever you want, just don't do this. And that was some command to delete all of the computer. And to this day, I've never looked that up because I can't remember what it was. But I think somehow, like, it got me really into like, I could use the computer as a tool, and I really enjoyed using it as a tool, but it also made me a little scared of the terminal. So that, I guess, took me until like 5 years ago to be really friendly with the terminal again, because I realized that somehow you had powers to delete everything if you were in the terminal. But my best friend at the time, and still a good friend, we would then go online and like find images of our like heroes and create wallpapers that we sent back and forth. And then I would ICQ. I don't know if you remember that, like the chat with my best friend.
I think.
Yeah, Little Flower. I would then chat with my friend in Sweden, who was a much bigger geek than me. They had like LAN parties. Do you call them that in English?
Yeah,
like
LAN parties.
LAN parties, and was like gaming and stuff. I never got into gaming. So that was my foray into the web, I guess.
Well, I mean, your teacher had a lot of vision to
He
be
had
able to.
Yes.
It's really, really cool. It's a sign of a great teacher
Yeah. Morten Seip, if you're listening to this, thank you so much. I don't think I should send him a thank you note, actually. I should. And then in high school, I got really interested more in kind of the design aspect. So I started subscribing to some magazine. I can't really remember what it's called, but it was like a creative web magazine. And I ended up going to their conference in London. I think I got my dad lives in London, so I kind of made it a trip, and I went to their conference. I think I was the only one. Like, I was probably like 17, 16 at the time. But there was a lot of like the Dreamweaver and Illustrator. It was like kind of Adobe land, design land. So I did a lot of work in that, and I ended up getting paid. I created a website for a gallery in Oslo that my mom's friend was the CEO or CO, the manager, I guess, of that gallery for a while. So I made that for her. And then I created my first JavaScript for a school play. We needed an image gallery to promote the school play. And that was my first real bug, because me and my mom, who had been taking some JavaScript classes at the time to like see if the web was something for her, we couldn't figure it out. It took like a day, 2 days or something, and I had spelled height wrong.
Oh.
You know, because this was in the days before like
no
linters, and there was so I am a copy paste queen to the day, because I'm a really bad speller, and I'm always going to remember spelling that wrong and spending so long, because we went over to the logic again and again, and we could find nothing wrong, and that was that stupid TH or HT problem.
We've all been there.
Yeah, right.
Too many times.
And we also we will be there in the future. Like this stuff like this keeps happening so many times.
Yeah, it is really like an ongoing issue. Like, there's always some things like that when you do programming, where it's the little things and you're like, well, I've checked everything, but you haven't checked the spelling or something simple or simple-ish like that. And then I think this is the first time I'm really talking through this. So sorry if it's a little rambling. But after that, I ended up realizing I should not do design in kind of after high school. I should do programming. So I applied and got into the Master of Computer Science program at the Technical University in Norway, where actually both my parents went, and I'm born in that city for that reason. And this was 2003, I guess. So there was nothing about the web in the program.
In school, yeah.
Yeah. So for the next kind of 5 years, it was all Java and .NET and that kind of stuff. And we had, this is, like a serious computer science education. We had, algorithm classes and all of that stuff, image processing techniques. So I didn't really, and I wasn't the kind of person that then like coded a lot outside of school. I did all kinds of other things. So for a while there, it was mostly that kind of school work. I did do some like WordPress work, and both for myself and others, because I still like that kind of aspect of getting things out there online. But nothing
what
serious.
What made you, why did you decide not to go the design route? You said you decided that you shouldn't go the design route, you should go the programming route. Why?
I realized I would probably not be the best designer. I would be an okay designer. And then I looked at like the career prospects for designers at the time, and I'm thinking it's still the same, that it would be a lot easier to get a high paying tech job than a high paying design job. Like you can get really good high paying design jobs, of course, but it's easier
Fewer and far between. Yeah.
to
Very
you know
pragmatic.
to get to a higher kind of level as a programmer. And also I realized I probably had more potential in programming. And I thought that less people would choose programming because it's supposedly harder than design and supposedly less creative than design. But, you know, I disagree.
Also not true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the answer, the short answer to my question is you were uncharacteristically self-aware as a high schooler. And that's why you were able to make that sort of mature decision. Okay, cool.
I mean, it also helps though that my mom and dad and all their friends went to this tech university,
the technical school. Yeah,
and I've also seen that none of them really worked with exactly what they were educated as. So this technical university has all of the like mechanical engineer and electrical engineer and robotics and all of those kind of. It's kind of. I mean, Norwegians will laugh, but it's like the Norwegian MIT. But I mean, we're nowhere near MIT because we're Norway, but like that's the kind of school it is. So I'd seen like they could go many directions with their education. And at the time, I probably thought I would like go and become like a, project leader and then, company leader or something was like my idea. But I like coding more and more.
What was your so then what was your first job like after graduation? Who did you go to work for? Or did you go to work for yourself right away? What was that like?
Yeah, so I, together with most of my class, we got jobs a year before we were done, because this is like the height of, it was like 2009, I guess. I graduated 2009. So the summer before, I got a job with a really nice consultancy company called Iterate, and I accepted a full-time position with them and went to work for them the year after, the year I graduated. And I think like a lot of us were sold a very wrong tale about what it would be to be a consultant. And in Norway, we have very high worker rights. So a lot of the tech work is done by these consultancy companies, where then other companies and governmental entities can hire in people and then fire them because they are then not employees. So there's a lot less in-house. It's changing now because people are realizing they need tech people in-house. But at the time, like everybody was mostly hired by these consultancy companies and then work on projects.
So because you were a contractor, you didn't have the worker protections.
I did at the company I worked, but if you were kind of the postal services, you don't want to hire 100 people to build something, because then 2 years later you only need 10 of them to kind of maintain it. So that's how we've solved it then in our ways, that you then go to one of these consultancy shops and then hire resources from them and then put that into your project. Gotcha. And it was a really cool company. But I think a lot of us that year were sold on, they so wanted us. So they came up to our university and they would like buy us alcohol and gourmet dinners and all these things. And they would talk about everyone being able to, work on what they wanted. And it was exciting projects. And if we only wanted to work like 3 months on one project, then that was fine. And we would get like to go to another project. And obviously none of this was true. When you got out there, you had to like work, in dingy offices and, we were not allowed to do whatever we wanted, of course. Like, I mean, it shouldn't be like that, but it was a little bit of
But
a buzzkill.
the expectations were misaligned.
The expectations were a little bit misaligned. Probably not as much for me since my mom had been in the industry though, but for a lot of us it was. But at the time, my friend Anders, he made a Spotify remote control for the iPhone, and we called it Remoteless. So this was when Spotify just came out and it didn't have remote functionality, and you could only play it on your computer. So this, or I think they had an app as well, but if you wanted to play it on your computer that was hooked up to your hi-fi system, then you would need a remote, or Anders at least needed a remote, and he made one. And then he asked me and a couple of others to join him, and I became kind of the marketing community person for Remoteless. And at the point, I think we made like 4K a month or something for a while in like iPhone app sales. So that was kind of my taste of real internet money. And we then started an app company where we made iPhone apps. And for a while, I did everything but programming, because along the way here, I got a little disillusioned, and I thought it was the programming I didn't like or the coding I didn't like, but it turned out it was the dingy offices that I didn't like. Surprise!
So that one specific app did not do well enough on its own to support the entire company, but you all saw that you had a decent team, so let's create a whole portfolio of apps. Is that what you're?
And also because we were both coming from like consultancy shops, we would then become like an agency for iPhone apps. And we did that for a while, and it worked really well. Actually, I mean, we realized that Spotify would like come with some solution. So for a while there, we made, because we were just newly graduated, we made enough, I guess like 4K or like 5K or something. It was enough for us to live off at the time when we were just, newly graduated. And then we did get some clients, but then Anders got a kid and he wanted more stability, and he took a job with an iPhone app agency. And I just kind of kept on alone, but then I hadn't coded for a while. So I started then coding an app, but I was still good at like the web stuff. Like I would set up WordPress sites in like no time to like sell stuff or, but then I started creating iPhone apps myself, and we called it Lily Apps. We were going to make apps for parents of small children. And that did pretty well, but it realized, it didn't make money right away, right? We were making a community app with like, you could make a map of child-friendly locations in Oslo or other places. So then other people could see. And what I didn't realize at the time, and that many people have done and failed on later, is that is a community, that is not a tech solution. So it depends on like what you want to make. And then we made Lilygram, which I'm really proud of. Actually, you would then tag Instagram photos with Lilygram, and we would print them out and send them to the grandparents or others that you would want to have like the paper version. I still wish we had that rolling, but there was some like tech challenges, and then suddenly I had a kid. And I'm a little fuzzy on the whole timeline in that period, I must say.
Were you, so you were developing native iPhone apps?
Yes.
Nice.
And then
what was that learning process like? How did you?
That wasn't that high, because I had been coding Java and .NET and stuff in university. So that felt pretty, I don't know, I can't remember anymore.
You made that
like
transition.
I started making the app, and like I made the app. I don't know.
I got the keyboard, typed some stuff in it, and suddenly an app.
Appeared.
I downloaded, what's it called, Xcode. And I worked on that, but we didn't make like real money from the Lily apps. So at the time I got then a contracting gig, because people were all over apps at the time. So I got a contracting gig for the Norwegian Directorate of Water and Energy. And I created an iPhone app for them that would then notify you about flood, landslide, and avalanches based on your location. And I did that for like made it and maintained it for like 4 or 5 years.
Oh wow.
But like
Nice.
part-time. And then
As
I worked on
part-time,
my,
though.
yeah,
Okay.
and then I worked on my own stuff. And then that transitioned into a hybrid app. So then I made an Ionic app with Angular. And then in that process, I kind of found Gatsby and like my way back to the web, I guess,
The web.
because
Okay.
Lilygram was a web app, but that I guess was like Backbone. Is that wasn't it called Backbone?
Backbone.
Yeah.
Yes.
But then like in that period, I like really remembered how much I love the web and that I never want to make iPhone apps again because it's a pain in the behind to update and test and all of that kind of stuff. And then I found another contracting gig where they wanted me to make a React web app. So that's what I've been doing the last, again, 4 years, I guess, for like my money for bread and butter.
Yeah.
And then I've been trying to like find that remoteless, I guess.
Yes. So
on the side.
you have a baseline. You have a client, like an anchor client. Your current status is
Yes.
providing that baseline, and
Yes.
you're working on POW, which is
POW, which is the Privacy First Menstrual Cycle Journal. And it's a web app created with Gatsby that launched in March 2020, just before the pandemic.
So why did you decide to create a privacy first menstrual tracker?
So a little bit of funny thing. So as I said, I'm a little fussy about the timeline there for a while because we had a kid and I kind of doubled down and just did the contracting and like parenting. And then I was kind of coming out of that bubble, I would say. And I was like, I'm not going to start a new side project because, I need to stop with the side projects.
Famous last words.
Famous last words. So I thought maybe let's get back into speaking because at least I could then, build my authority and get like cooler clients for being a web developer, a React developer that I then had become. So I went to this Global CFP Day or Global Diversity CFP Day. It's an initiative where they try to help tech folks from diverse backgrounds do more speaking. So I went to that, and then they talked about different ways of coming up with talk topics. So this was 2019, January 2019, and I came in with an idea that I would do a Gatsby talk because I'd gotten really interested in Gatsby and the way they approach things. So I thought I would do a Gatsby talk, but then I went there, and then they said, well, one way to decide on something to talk about is to figure out something you want to learn and then write a proposal and then learn it. And then because you have to learn it because you're supposed to give the talk. Yes. And then I think about 2 weeks later, the Wall Street Journal came out with their like landslide article about how all the health apps were tracking us and then sending health data and health events to Facebook, basically, and other ad brokers. And that's when I thought like this idea I've had probably since uni about like I wanted something simpler to track my cycle with. But then that kind of hit like, if I made something like that, then I would be privy to my friends' data. I don't want to do that. So I was like, how could I make this privacy first? And then I make it a talk proposal on that and got 4 acceptances, and I had to just learn, web crypto and all of that stuff. But then when I was procrastinating the slides, I created the prototype. So famous last word, new side project. And then we launched in March 2020. But as I said, at the time I wanted to do Gatsby talk. So now I'm kind of like full circle where I made POW with Gatsby, and my future plans is to do POW and then kind of create a Gatsby authority business of some kind with courses and maybe productized services so I can create plugins for other people.
Okay.
Kind of like the WordPress plugin stuff of, how that worked.
Yep.
So that's the future plans.
And that's where you are today.
Yes. And then hopefully in a year, I won't do any more of the hourly contracting.
Yes.
That's the plan.
Nice. Familiar with that.
Yeah.
familiar with that approach.
Yeah. You should
Okay,
never let me
Queen
start
Ray.
talking because I
Thank
can
you.
talk and talk and talk.
Well, we all can. I think that's a good characteristic to have when
Yes.
you have a podcast. But yeah, so
That's
yeah,
me.
thanks for all of that. Benedict, who are you? And
How did you get into programming?
how did you get here?
How did I get here? Yeah, like while you were talking, I started reflecting a little bit and like writing down notes, and I don't remember like the exact year when I started getting into programming, but there are a couple of things I remember from my childhood. Basically, one thing, like the way I got into computers was like for a long time, I was super bored by my dad and my grandfather just like talking about computers all the day and all time, and like it was both their hobby, like they weren't really involved in that stuff like by trade, but it was their shared hobby, and they whenever they would meet, they just talk about computers the entire time, and we sit there and be like, what's this? But I guess it got me interested enough over time that I got into computers, and they built me a computer and I started using it. And eventually my school offered like an elective class like that you could do like in the afternoons that would teach you some programming. And that's where basically my first time actually typing commands into a computer and having it do things. And I think my first piece of code I wrote was a calculator that would just add two numbers and then exit. So, and I
would never have gotten into programming that way.
Yeah, like, and the advanced version was like basically in our spare time we started reading up on that stuff and like playing with the documentation and like writing code. And the advanced version of that program was you'd start it would ask you what mathematical operation you want to do, ask you for the inputs, do the calculation, then an exit. So you could either add two numbers, divide two numbers, multiply two numbers, or subtract two numbers, and that's it. So that was my first software program, I guess. And a while after that, and that was close to the year 2000. I think it was end of 99, where I don't know why I got into a store and I saw this book about like building websites or doing stuff on the internet. And I mean, people from Germany might remember that the publisher, it was called Data Becker. And it's were like, looking back, they were really shitty books. Like it was like kitchen sink. Like, it was pretty thick. Like there was a lot of stuff in there, but hardly any structure. Basically, someone just dumping everything they ever found about doing stuff on the web in there. It had like Perl, it had HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all dumped in there without a lot of structure, to be honest. But it was enough to get me.
I feel like the listeners kind of need to realize that both the period that Benedict was talking about and I was talking about, there was no Google.
Right, there was no Google. Right. Yeah, I think
because Google came when I was in university, so you had to have the book to have the reference or like the documentation. You needed the book.
Yes, I learned most of my programming knowledge from books, and like back then, I'd really enjoy going to the bookstore, going to the tech book section, program book section, just looking at stuff and then picking one thing that looked interesting and like buying it and then learning it or not learning it, depending on how difficult it turned out to be. Like, for example, at some point I bought a C++ book and I barely got past the first couple of pages because I couldn't get anything to work on my Windows machine back then. Like stuff just wouldn't compile for whatever reason. And as you just said, like there wasn't Google or anything, so copy pasting the error messages somewhere wasn't an option. I think I
really
didn't
hard
even
to
have
debug at the time.
I didn't even have like a dedicated like internet connection. I mean, back then it was paid by the minute, and you had to dial up, and nobody could use the phone and stuff like that. So that wasn't an option back then. Right. So, anyways, like I got this book, and I feel like this really got me started because after that, I never stopped not building stuff for the web or building websites and stuff like that. as I said, the book mentioned a lot of Perl, and I had a friend back then who was like, "Oh, don't bother with Perl. It's just too complicated to read and to write and too weird. Just learn this new thing over here. It's called PHP and super great." So I got myself a PHP book and started learning PHP, and I think that was the first time I was actually building proper stuff, I guess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that got me started into building stuff for the web. At the time, I was super into Ultima Online, the role playing game, basically where you had a server and would play with a couple of other people. But the downside of that was if you wanted to play on the official servers, you needed a subscription. And of course, I was in school, I didn't earn any money, so I couldn't afford that. But back then, they still had a loophole in their terms of services that didn't prevent you from reverse engineering the protocol and like hosting your own server. And of course, I didn't reverse engineer anything or stuff like that. But like other people had done that, and there was like open source software that you can run to basically host your own worlds there. So I don't remember how I met all those people, but eventually we were a group of like people from all over Germany that were running the service together. Like we rented a server somewhere and installed the stuff in there, and there were scripting languages that you could use to like change game behavior and stuff like that. So I feel like I've been doing remote work with a remote team since 2001 or something like that. Slack
funny.
was called RIC back then.
What happened to Iris? I mean, these old chatting protocols were really good. Like, why did they just like? Yeah, that's a story for another time, or discussion for another time.
I guess most of that stuff is still around. We just stopped using it for some reason. I wonder, like, if I could remember like all the server names and channel names, maybe I'd find some old friends in there. Who knows? But anyways, I feel like that's the part where I got like more seriously into programming and building stuff on the web. It was also at that time where I started doing that for money a little bit. So I basically started my consulting business at 14 or 15 and earned some money on the web, like just building PHP code for people. And it was also around that time where I started using that skill to build websites for local bands and local festivals. And that eventually, like down the road, led me to my first side project. Well, there have been plenty of side projects in my life. It probably doesn't make any sense to list them all. But the one that got really serious was Stage CMS, basically a content management system for musicians and bands. And over 10 years or so, I worked on that and eventually launched it. And it eventually made some money, but it never took off to make like meaningful revenue. I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like at its peak, it was like 300 or 400 euros MRR, something like that. Maybe 500. I don't quite remember. But since at some points, like I was super invested in it. Basically, I mean, I skipped over a bunch of stuff. So let me backtrack a little bit.
As you have to.
Let me backtrack a little bit because after school, I started studying computer science. I still did some PHP work for like local consultancies, basically being a freelancer, working on various things. And eventually in 2010, I got a job at a local startup. Well, it wasn't local back then, but now it's I moved, got a job at a startup, and worked there for 2.5 years or so. And at some point, I decided this isn't for me anymore. Dropped out of that, and became independent and started being a full-time freelancer and actually like doing this in a serious way, not just like on the side dabbling around with stuff, but like making this my full-time income. And one of the motivations for that was also to like focus on the side project and make the side project, the CMS, a real thing. So for a while, my time was basically split between 60% working on consulting projects and 40% like working on the product. And as I said, like it launched, it made some money, but eventually I realized that it's a tough crowd or tough market, and it's not easy to sell to. And basically, musicians don't care that much to Google for it, to look for it, to even care. Like even when you talk to them, they will. I have a Facebook page. That's all I need. Stuff like that. So eventually, I decided I shouldn't spend more time on this. And by now, like it's still up and running. I think I have 3 paying customers at this point, but it's barely paying its bills. And honestly, I probably should just shut it down, but I don't know.
As long as you can afford, though, it's really nice for the 3 or 4 customers probably been with you since the beginning and who supported you. It's nice to keep it going for them and they don't have to learn a new thing.
Yeah, exactly. So that's basically the only reason why I keep running it. And yeah, but like I don't put more time into it because it's a lost cause in a way. But back then I was also working, as I said, as a consultant, and I ended up working with Jane Portman on her first SaaS product called Tiny Reminder. And at some point she decided to sell that and move on to something else. And that was when the idea for UserList came up, and she asked me if I'd be willing to partner up with her on that and start this new business together. And I said yes, and I think we started working on UserList in 2017. We launched it in 2019, all while still like working on the site as consultants. Mm-hmm. And we've been full-time on it since January 2020, which was partly possible because we joined Tiny Seed and got a little bit of funding. And yeah, that's basically our main focus since then.
Living the dream.
That's mostly, well, I don't.
Well, living our dream.
Yeah.
Brian and my mind's dream.
You're right, of sorts. Like it was my dream as well. Like this is where I wanted to get all the time. But now that I'm here, I'm not entirely sure if that's it.
Isn't it always like that?
Yeah, it's funny how often you hear that. Mm-hmm. And I saw this. Who tweeted this the other day? That was basically like SaaS MRR anticlimactic moments. 1,000 MRR, 10,000 MRR, 20,000 MRR. Somebody tweeted something about that. And I mean, to be on this side of it, $0 MRR, and I'm like, how can 10K MRR be anticlimactic? I believe it must be because everybody who is there says it is. I can't imagine it being anticlimactic though, but it's just all experience is relative, and so I guess that's why. But
yeah. I've also seen a really good YouTube a YouTuber, I think, had a video on YouTube about this. I'll see if I can find it and we can link to it in the show notes. But it's about like how every time they like hit their new goal, they were like, but what am I doing with my life now? Kind of thing. But he just explains it really well, and it doesn't sound kind of, I don't know, stupid. Like you understand what he's talking about, and he's like basically talking about enjoying the journey.
Yep. And I think Stoicism calls that the hedonic treadmill or something.
Also,
something to that effect. That, like, it's always an arm's reach out.
I think one thing that plays into it, that you always imagine the future to be nicer or easier or whatever than it actually turns out to be, because like we're now
more
dealing
of the same.
with stuff. Well, more of the same, and we're also dealing with stuff that I never really considered. Like when I was just like looking at this from the outside. I mean, one of the things is the opposite thing, that MRR doesn't necessarily mean profits and stuff like that. So it's still a grind, and at some point it's like growth matters and growth rate matters, because otherwise it feels like pushing a rock up the hill and stuff like that. So but I don't want to complain. Like
Not
You can
complaining, just
complain to us
telling
if
the
you
truth.
want to, though.
Telling the truth, man.
I feel like overall I'm still happy where I am because like I enjoy the work. Of course, I sometimes wish things would go faster, be more successful, make more money, like I don't know, stuff like that,
Right.
have more free time. But overall, if I had to choose between doing what I'm doing now and going back to a full-time job or something, I'd probably still keep doing what I'm doing now. So
Well,
You got to know what to
it's okay.
compare it
That-
to, right? Because
yeah.
that's, yeah. I also
There you go.
forget sometimes when I'm like comparing myself to others who have that I went to university with that now has like full-time jobs and like climbed the ranks and stuff like that. Like sometimes we're like, well, I want that house. But then I remember that I can just do something tomorrow. I could go and like go on a trip if I wanted to, or like not like I have a lot more freedom and I can decide what's it called, like power over my own time, which I realized means a lot to me, but I forget that it can be taken away because I've had it for 10 years now because I quit my job 10 years ago. Yeah, so we gotta go back to those things and remember what you're comparing yourself to.
Yeah, for sure.
Well said.
So that's my origin story of sorts. I mean, I too could go on longer and longer, and there's stuff I didn't talk about, which would probably be fun, but whatever. What about you, Brian? Tell us about your story, because I feel like you wrote down some notes, and I'm sure I haven't heard about all of those yet. So.
Okay. Well, I'll try to cover them, and I've written about some of these things online, and so I'll link to these things in the show notes if I have to kind of skim over a few things a little bit quickly. But so like y'all, my intro to the web was like 94, 95. I was like freshman something in high school, freshman, sophomore. And so my dad had been running a mail order Apple repair business for a number of years. Like, he'd put a small little ad in a magazine, and people would send a power supply to our house, in the mail. He would fix it and send it back, basically, or motherboards.
Apple the computer.
Apple, yes, Apple, like 2E power supplies and motherboards, and eventually, taught my brother and I.
That is cool, though. Sorry, can we just talk about how cool that is? That your dad was like in the beginning.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, he was like working the line at like the bakery in town, and decided he wanted to work for himself, and
super cool.
Like,
okay,
classic. Table in the bedroom, then 2 tables in the kitchen, takes over the garage, and then moves into an office down in our little town. But and so but then eventually the World Wide Web, www, shows up, and so he starts an ISP, internet service provider, in Paris, Texas. And he's like, hey Brian, I think the internet might be kind of big, you should maybe think about learning something about it. And I thought it was super cool because I could find, I've said this many times, like I thought the internet was cool because I could find Nirvana lyrics, I didn't, appreciate what it really was. But so I would, he would go around town and sell websites to businesses, and then, bring them to the office, and it'd be his, 15-year-old, 16-year-old son, building them, actually doing the work. And so that's how I got into it. And it was, it scratched an itch for me. It was creative. It was cool. And so that was my intro. But that's not what I went to school for. I was really into art in high school. And so I first went into graphic design and was kind of, exploring that bit of it, got disillusioned, and, eventually, more to this story as well, but eventually I got my degree is in art education. And so I was a middle school art teacher for 5 years after college. Was still kind of like tinkering around with web stuff on the side. Fast forward some number of years later, my wife and I were about to have our second kiddo, and we want to find a way for her to stay at home full time. And so we needed to fill that gap, that income gap. And I was like, hey, what if I start building websites on the side and just like charge a little bit for that? And then that built and built and built until eventually I could quit this job that I didn't like and do contracting web development full time. And that was great. And that totally worked. And then we decided we wanted to move from Dallas to Colorado. And so,
But what year are we now? Like,
so
since
now
you're
we're in 2012.
okay, yeah.
So from like, let's see, so from about 2010 to 12 is when I started building websites again on the side. Didn't realize how much I didn't know, how much had changed, in that period of time. But so to try to get moved out to Colorado, to Boulder, Denver, I built hirebrianray.com, and which was basically like at the time, parallax scrolling, JavaScript stuff, like, it's definitely shows its age, but at the time it was pretty cool.
It's still live?
And I don't think it's live anymore. I'm certain. In fact, I'm certain it's not. I'm
Ah,
certain it's not live
I wanted to see this.
yeah, I need to like get an actually usable version of it so I can see it again. But anyway, so Brad Feld, who is like the godfather of startups in Boulder, I sent him an email and I was like, hey, I want to join the ecosystem. I think that a tweet from you that says somebody should hire brianray.com will do it. And he actually did it. and so for 2 weeks I was, internet famous in the small little bubble of folks that I needed to be known for. And I was getting like email outright offers from San Francisco, Toronto, New York, but most importantly from Boulder. And so hirebrianray.com totally worked. I joined a startup called Macavo. We were a competitor to Ancestry.com. It's a genealogy company. Worked there. Like I joined just as like a JavaScript developer, but kind of developed into UX lead and then eventually chief of product. So I was very fortunate that the leadership team there saw some potential and promise, and because we were a small, fast moving team, I was able to move up and have a bit more, influence as time went on. We had an incredible outcome. We sold that company to a company called Find My Past, which is like a big competitor to Ancestry based in Europe, based in London. And that was incredible. Like it just, it was amazing. All the things that aren't supposed to happen for startups, it happened for us at Macavo. And, but for me personally, it was, a big spike in, our bank statement. But like, I was going to work the very next day. It was like, oh, cool. This is how we're going to have a down payment on a house. That's so cool that happened. Onward. So it was really incredible. Saw the potential there. And just like what having, an influx of capital can do for a family. And so I needed to continue to work there for like a year, which ended up being super miserable. Like we were this tiny little agile team, and then, the parents in London bought us and decided that we all needed, bosses who know what processes are and blah, blah, blah. And it was just like, you guys are suffocating us. And so the second I could leave that company, I did, and joined the CEO of Macavo to work on a new startup, which was called Binox. And it was going to be a search engine for all of your cloud services. And that was, yeah, I've like got a crying emoji next to it in my outline here because it was just really, really hard. We were struggling, things weren't clicking. We just couldn't find any momentum in the middle of it. My dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and died just March, April, May, just like diagnosis. And then 4 months later, he passed away. So, put down your cigarettes, whatever it takes, if you're listening. And, that just put me into a deep depression. I wasn't fulfilled at work. I had the most tragic thing that I've experienced, happen. It just like it all fell apart. And so we, dissolved the company, returned what money was left in the bank to our investors. And it was just really, really hard. It was a crappy time. And that is when I realized like I can't go back to work for some other company. I'm not my best self. Also, I think that I can, I've got a better shot at the outcome I want by doing consulting, product consulting, and trying to build up, hello, a side project that is, that the world is going.
Went from like high to like really low then at
The
like
highest of highs to the lowest of lows.
Yeah.
So far that I've experienced.
And probably let's hope it's the lowest of the low that you will experience.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yes. And so, that was my plan is I'll do consulting. I'll get a nice base of income, and then I'll build this SaaS on the side that 6 months from now will, be pulling in 5K MRR. And then shortly after that, 10, and we're fine.
Sounds so familiar.
Sorry. I'm not laughing
exactly...
at you. I'm just laughing at
you should
the Twitter, I guess, or the
feel free to laugh at me. And so that was called Feature Audit, and that's when Benedict and I started this podcast. I had been on Jane's podcast, UI Breakfast, talking about Feature Audit. And Feature Audit was basically like this very simple, tool that would show product people, which of the features on your site are people using frequently, infrequently, or most people using blah blah blah, whatever. So that's how we started this show, was with me working on that product. Benedict and I had never spoken to each other until episode 1, by the way.
So how did you decide to do the podcast?
Because I reached out to Jane and said, hey, I think I want to start a Build It in Public show. And you're super cool. And I know that you're working on this thing called User List. This would be awesome. We should do this together. And she was like, that's great. Except, I'm kind of full, but, my co-founder Benedict used to podcast, and we've kind of been talking about him doing a show. Y'all should do it. Y'all should do it together. And I was like, well, we've never met, but Benedict, what do you think? So yeah. And so episode 1 is the first time we had ever even spoken to each other, which I think is a fun backstory there.
That's
anyway.
Cool.
Yeah. So it eventually at some point, Feature Audit was just not getting any sort of traction. I shut it down. And started working on Headlamp because I was seeing this trend in remote work. I've always been interested in employee engagement, employee satisfaction, company culture, intrinsic motivation, autonomy, mastery, purpose, like all that stuff. What makes people work, and how can companies appreciate their people? And so I thought that was kind of what I wanted Headlamp to be. And I got it into a decent place, and I'm pretty convinced if I had stuck with it, that it would be a very different version of the last thing that I touched on it. But I think that, it might be at 500 MRR or something by now. The problem is that I was just fully burned out, like completely burned out. Still feeling, pretty depressed. I've had bouts of serious depression since I was probably like 15 or 16. It's just like a seasonal, or like a, not seasonal in terms of the earth, but like seasonal in terms of my life, and so I realized I got to quit trying to make this work. I got to quit trying to be like, I've got to be this, bootstrapped, person who's doing consulting to spin up a SaaS and then, go to conferences and give talks about it. And just like, I got to free myself of that and stop pushing it and trying so hard, and take care of myself. And so I quit working on Headlamp, realized that I was burnt out and depressed and needed something, to get out of it. And that is when I started working on a board game with my friend Graham, and that's called Backpack. And as soon as I just freed myself of the self-imposed responsibility to build some successful SaaS company, and just accepted, hey, consulting work is going to come as it comes. Be grateful for it, and then do this purely creative thing over here on the side that has no desired outcome other than it will be fun to work on, and it will feel creative. It'll scratch that artistic side of myself that hasn't been, given any attention for a while. After some number of months, okay, yeah, I'm totally coming out of the fog. This is great. This is what it's supposed to feel like. And lo and behold, I also got a couple of the coolest clients I've ever worked with, Minecraft and Lego, along the way there.
That's awesome. That's some killer clients.
They were so perfect for what, everything I love. And they were around this. So they were around jobs to be done, which is this, product methodology that I've been interested in for a while. It had to do with, parents and education, tying back to my actual, degree. It was perfect. Anyway. And so that is where I find myself right now, is this work that I did for those clients. Is that a thing? JTBD.app. Is that what I'm going to work on? Should I spin Headlamp back up and just give it a chance? Do I have that sort of, mental and emotional capacity again? So that is where we're at. And Queen Ray,
wow,
you have a live webinar starting in just a few minutes.
8.
And so we may need to.
8 minutes.
We may just need to leave it at a hard stop right there. and
this
see if we need
this is awesome. Wow, I've learned so much about the two of you, and that is super interesting for the discussions we can have moving forward, I think, because then we know a little bit. And I do understand why you asked me why I didn't go for the design now. You were very into that question. I was like, okay.
Yeah, I am totally curious. So maybe 101 can just be time for follow-up questions or listener questions. That could be cool.
Yeah,
that will be fun. Yeah.
Any questions? I'm an open book.
Yeah, well, good, because you build things in public and. Okie doke.
Nice.
Well, until next time.
Yeah. Until next time.
It feels like we should hold hands or something now, have some proper.
Oh, let's hug.
We'll hug.
Virtual hug
here on
our screen.
And hug you as well, listener. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.